Hello everyone, this is part 12 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
The bleak dirt path seemed to stretch on forever, endlessly winding in between the trees like a drunken snake. The five of them trudged along, all of them far too weary and the weather too dreary for them to attempt conversation. Jiraiya took the lead, walking purposefully like he actually knew where they were going, which of course wasn't true. The three Chunin walked side by side a few paces behind him, increasingly distressed by the endless path. Anko brought up the rear, equally irritated and annoyed as Naruto, Gaara, and Tayuya, but the difference was she was more vocal. Come on Jiraiya, when the hell are we going to get there? The white-haired man in question's eyes twitched as the tick that had been steadily growing since the departure gained a friend. Quiet down Anko, you're worse than the Gaki here. Everybody else in the group would have taken offense at that had they not been far too tired to care either way. Anko was about to retort in her usual manner, but they were saved from Jiraiya exploding as they rounded the corner of the paths and the trees finally broke. They rounded the crest of a hill and stared down at the sprawling mini-metropolis below them. This is Tanzaku town. Anko looked down at it in wonder. There were so many people going about in the full throes of some festival or another. As far as she knew, there was always something to celebrate in this town. It was what made it such a tourist hotspot. Jiraiya turned around to face the group, particularly Naruto. Now you're sure Tsunade will be here? Naruto just scoffed, looking insulted. Of course she will be, they're celebrating the Kishihoto festival here. That's the biggest gambling event of the season in this part of the country. I bet she couldn't avoid this place if she wanted to. Jiraiya sighed. He knew Naruto had a point, but he hated being reminded of it. He was the one who was supposed to have the inscrutable spy network, not the little blonde Gaki here. Fine. Let's just go get some rooms booked and we can start searching tomorrow. Everybody in the group nodded enthusiastically. They were tired of walking and wanted to get off their feet. Hey Jiraiya, wait up. Naruto ran after the large Sannin, who paused to allow him to catch up. What is it, Naruto? The blonde boy ran over, still not winded despite having run clear across the village in search of the legendary pervert. So if all that stuff about the Akatsuki is true. Jiraiya looked offended, like his intelligence could ever be wrong. Then what are we going to do about it? Jiraiya stared at the young boy, wondering just how much he could tell him. It was true he hadn't been there for his godchild throughout most of his life, but he at least appeared to be relatively perceptive and somewhat level-headed. We're not going to do anything. He had stressed the word, and Naruto stared at him confused until he clarified. I'm going to find Tsunade and try to convince her to take the position of Hokage. Naruto nodded slowly, seeing the logic in finding a strong leader for the village in a time of crisis. If what Jiraiya said about the Akatsuki was true, then this was definitely a time of crisis. What worried Naruto the most was that if they were collecting the Biju, then it wasn't only Naruto who was in danger, but Gaara as well. Alright then, I can help you with that. Jiraiya looked at him strangely, eyebrow quirked and an amused smile on his face. And how exactly do you think you can help me? It was Naruto's turn to smirk as he confidently looked out at the horizon in the distance. Because I know where Tsunade will be. Naruto relaxed into the chair, taking in the plethora of food laid out in front of them by the very kind and polite staff of the hotel. He happily dug into the assortments of sashimi while his friends and sensei did the same. Jiraiya didn't eat, surprisingly. Instead he was off talking to somebody Naruto would have guessed was a contact in his spy network. No doubt the man was currently scouring the small city in an attempt to find his old teammate. In fact, he was only doing such because Anko had forcefully stopped him from running off to the various brothels in the town, 3 times. Having her along was the best thing to happen because she detested perverts of all kinds. It was a thought Naruto now found particularly hilarious considering who the author of the books she now happily read was. Jiraiya finally entered the room, sitting down with a very frustrated look, which Naruto took to mean the search had been unsuccessful so far. He seemed to shake it off and turn happily to Naruto, with a mischievous glint in his eye. Well Naruto, I came to a decision that since you are out here with me, I might as well train you a little. Jiraiya didn't get the reaction he had been expecting with that statement. Anko shot him a death glare like he was insinuating that she was incapable of teaching Naruto, while Tayuya was doing likewise, wondering why the hell Naruto was getting special treatment. Jiraiya gulped loudly from the combined attack from the two angered females. Now Anko, I didn't mean to imply you aren't a good teacher, it would simply be a technique that you don't know. Anko still seemed annoyed but was now at least curious as to what Jiraiya would teach Naruto. And Tayuya, don't worry about it, you could attempt it as well. Again the younger girl still seemed irritated but at least somewhat sated. Jiraiya was more curious as to why he had no reaction from the two boys yet. So what would you teach me? It was said plainly, only the faintest hints of intrigue that made Jiraiya want to cry. He was a Sannin, actually offering training to somebody, and they were only slightly curious. Gaara on the other hand didn't even look like he was paying attention anymore, more focused on the food in front of him than the pervert at the head of the table. Jiraiya tried to ignore him and turned back to Naruto, turning on his salesman voice to further interest the kid. How about the move I used on Kisame when I rescued you too? He added a small eyebrow wiggle to complete the enticement, but Naruto smirked at him calmly and stood up from the table and clutched his right wrist with his left hand. Quickly, and much to Jiraiya's astonishment, blue energy began to form in the palm of Naruto's hand, rapidly coalescing into a large sphere. Jiraiya just stood watching the spinning orb of chakra, transfixed by its size before Naruto dispelled it harmlessly. You mean that one? The three of them hopped through the trees. It had taken them a long slog through the desert, but they were finally in river country and on schedule. None of them wanted anything to go wrong with their first unsupervised B-rank mission, so they had to cut out the usual antics that Baki would have kept to a minimum. Even so, Naruto wasn't really paying attention to the branches ahead of them, more focused on the kunai in his hand. Tayuya looked across at him in annoyance. Naruto hadn't dropped that kunai since they had left the village. Normally that wouldn't have annoyed her, it paid to be safe, but he wasn't even using it for its proper purpose. When he had told her he was going to invent his own chakra control exercise, she had actually laughed in his face. It just sounded that ridiculous. Even so, here he was, running along whilst perfectly balancing the kunai point down on the palm of his hand. From what Tayuya understood in the mumbled and nearly incoherent description Naruto had given, the objective was to focus chakra in streams from the tenketsu in your hand. Then using those streams of chakra like tethers you would hold up the kunai. It sounded simple enough, but the concentration and sheer volume of chakra required made it completely useless for anybody except chakra powerhouses like Naruto. She stopped focusing on him and instead thought about the mission at hand, a simple retrieval mission. Normally that wouldn't warrant a B rank, except what they were retrieving was money and the person they were retrieving it from was Tsunade of the Sannin. She had run out on a gambling debt, a very large one if the client's anger was anything to go on, and apparently that warranted the hiring of ninja to track her down and retrieve it. Honestly, the girl thought it was a major waste of her time and skills, but at least she would be able to meet Tsunade. The woman was like an icon to many kunoichi across the elemental nations, supposedly one of the most powerful shinobi in the world. Tayuya would hardly describe herself as a fangirl or a sycophant of any kind, but she didn't turn down opportunities when they presented themselves. Meeting Tsunade definitely counted as an opportunity in her book, a great one too. Naruto, would you quit playing with that stupid kunai? Naruto just waved at her offhandedly, making Tayuya scowl. Wait, I think I almost have it. Tayuya was about to come over and beat him a little for waving her off, but watching in amazement as Naruto put too much chakra into his exercise and the kunai flew out of his hand, embedding itself into a tree not far away. That wasn't what interested her. What was more fascinating was the slight swirl of chakra that was left in Naruto's hand. He didn't even seem to realize it was there until he looked down and yelped in surprise. He flapped his arm and the chakra dissipated instantly. Wait, shithead, do that again. Naruto looked at her strangely but pulled out another kunai, performing the exact same procedure, ending up with another kunai drilled into a tree. All three of them watched, amazed as swirling chakra once again was left in Naruto's hand before slowly disappearing as the energies were released. That was fucking awesome. How did you do that? Naruto just shrugged, looking at his hand in amazement. The rest of the trip to the town Tsunade was last spotted in went fairly quickly. Naruto continued with his newfound skill, finding that he didn't need a kunai to make the chakra appear. Now he would just hold out his hand and after a moment of concentration swirling chakra appeared. They were all astounded by the new technique Naruto had seemingly created. They had no idea what it could be used for, but that was what experimentation was for. They reached the town with Naruto still playing with the swirling blue chakra and quickly scouted out the nearest taverns and gambling halls, which was where they were told they would find the youthful-looking Sannin. This was also one of the reasons Tayuya wanted to find Tsunade. Her healing skills were legendary and she had supposedly found a way to make herself appear youthful well into her 50s. What woman didn't want that? They kept asking around town and eventually struck lucky as somebody recognized seeing the woman they were after at a pub not far from them. They ran to the location, entering nonchalantly to not arouse suspicion. They received a few odd looks from the patrons because of their age, but when they saw the headbands they lost interest. There was an unspoken rule regarding shinobi, best expressed as, old enough to kill, old enough to drink. Many barmen went along with this because it merely added to their potential clientele, and that meant more money for them. They found a booth quickly and scouted out the small tavern. It didn't take long to find the aging Sannin. She tended to change her appearance often to fool people like them trying to find her after running out on a debt, but there were clues. 2 very large clues. Naruto's mouth hung open a little as he stared at the woman, only snapping out of it when he remembered she was about 5 times his age. Of course, Tayuya slapping him on the back of his head had nothing to do with it. They discussed how to approach the situation. The woman was legendary for a few reasons and her strength was one of them. She also seemed to be accompanied by a young girl, probably about 18, which might pose a problem if she decided to run interference, giving Tsunade time to escape. In the end they decided to wait. The woman seemed to be drinking herself into a stupor and they would allow it, then they would approach directly, letting Gaara do the talking, as he was the most sensible of the 3. Finally they agreed that Tsunade was drunk enough and they walked over. Immediately the girl next to her became defensive seeing Gaara's headband, but Naruto put up his hands showing they meant no harm. The girl was still tense but she allowed him to sit down, eyeing them warily. Gaara sat down in the middle of the booth so he could talk while Naruto and Tayuya sat on either side, Naruto in the corner so he could continue to play with his new ability. Please don't feel alarmed by our presence, we are merely here to collect the money you owe. After that we will go and leave you in peace, as there is no need for conflict. The very drunk and sleepy Tsunade on the other side of the booth let out a loud and amused snort. Ha! Little brach think they actually stand a chance against me. Naruto had to hold back a snicker. From the way the woman talked she was obviously absolutely hammered. It did put them on guard however. Many shinobi feigned being more drunk than they actually were to catch their enemies off guard. What makes you think I can't just walk out of here and there isn't a damn thing you could do to stop me? Naruto tuned out the conversation at this point. He would just let Gaara deal with it as the planned. He continued to play with the chakra in his hands, marveling for a moment as he got it to spin wildly for a few seconds, wondering if he could do something with that. Tsunade caught the action. Even in her hazy state she saw what looked a lot like her teammate's attack in one of the kid's hands. Ha! Well would you look at that. The brat thinkish he can do the Rasengan. Naruto looked up, seeing that she was taking about him and suddenly gained interest in the conversation. His teammates and the girl to Tsunade's side also looked over at him in interest. Tsunade sneered a little, looking slightly to Naruto's left as she swayed for a moment. Like a little brat like you could ever hope to learn the 4th Hokage technique. Now Naruto was very interested. What are you talking about? Tsunade swayed a bit more, her eyes not quite focusing in the same place before turning back to Naruto. He might have been imagining it but her actions seemed even more pronounced and exaggerated, like she was in fact faking. Unbeknownst to him Tsunade had actually been using her medical training to quickly burn off the excess alcohol in her system since the moment they sat down. Unfortunately for her the procedure took time and her mind was still a little fuzzy. The Rasengan was a technique created by the 4th Hokage. To this day only he and Jiraiya, Lady Tsunade's old teammate, have ever mastered it. Naruto looked in the direction of the young woman who answered him as she stuck out her hand in a handshake. I'm Shizune, Lady Tsunade's personal assistant. Naruto took the hand and shook it. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Everybody missed Tsunade raise an eyebrow at hearing the name but she covered it well. I'm sorry Naruto but while Lady Tsunade is like this I'm obligated to tell you that we currently do not have the funds to repay the money we lost. She looked worriedly at Tsunade who looked about ready to take a nap, embarrassingly using her own ample bosom as a makeshift pillow. May I ask what you were instructed to do should we not comply? Naruto nodded and Gaara took over. We have explicit orders that should you be unable to repay the debt, or in the event you refuse, we are to escort you back to our client. Shizune once again looked sadly at her boss and mother figure before shaking her head. I'm sorry, but Lady Tsunade won't. She was interrupted as Tsunade's head suddenly came up, looking at the three genin intently, especially Naruto. Shush Shizune, she narrowed her eyes with a smirk, I have a proposition for the branch. Shizune looked extremely worried as she played with her hands. Lady Tsunade, I don't think that's a good idea, we can't. The older woman just looked at her young apprentice, very clearly telling her to be quiet, which she did so. You. The blonde one, Naruto. Naruto scowled at the drunken woman but let her continue. How long have you got before you have to bring me back? Gaara answered for him. We were given a month before we have to return to Sunagakur, we left 2 days ago. Tsunade nodded in an exaggerated manner, mulling over the numbers with difficulty as her drunken mind tried to grasp maths. Okay then, I'll give this little Gaki 3 weeks to learn the Rasengan. She looked right at Naruto in a very smug manner. If you can do that then I'll pay back the money. Sound fair. In fact if you do it I'll even throw in my necklace. Gaara narrowed his eyes at the proposition. There was obviously some catch but there was no way they could actually take on one of the Sannin so they had no other choice. How do we know you won't run away while Naruto is training? Tsunade smiled drunkenly with her eyes closed, looking damn near to passing out. One of you branch can watch me if you like. She looked thoughtful for a moment before surprising everybody at the table by grabbing her breasts in both hands, but no funny business. And with another satisfied smile she happily lay down on the boobs she had just grabbed and dozed off. Everybody just stared at her a moment with large drops of sweat hanging off her heads before Shizune smiled and began to hoist Tsunade up using her shoulder. Well, you might as well come and stay at our hotel room. The three genin nodded, following the older woman carrying the even older woman out of the bar. Naruto stopped outside, slapping his head in annoyance as he remembered something. Wait, I still don't know what the hell a Rasengan is. Naruto lay on the ground, exhausted and spent. He brought his hand up to his face, turning it in the moonlight to see the extent of the damage his training had done. He had chakra burns practically covering his hand. Kyubi was doing her best to keep up with the damage with her own chakra, but that was the problem in the first place. While Shizune had explained the concept of the Rasengan, and Tsunade improved that description when she finally sobered up, knowing what something is and actually doing it were two different things. All they knew was it had something to do with spinning the chakra, condensing it then holding it, much easier said than done. Naruto pulled in a deep, painful breath and raised his hand, already channeling the chakra and spinning it. He looked at the rotating disc of chakra in his hand, shaking his head as his did so. He knew it was supposed to be a ball but he didn't know how to manipulate the chakra into such a shape. He tried to visualize a sphere, going back to basics as it were, thinking of how it was made up. He guessed it was just a load of different rings at different angles and thought how he could use that. He took another deep breath and tried to will another disc into existence, this time spinning vertically. He just managed to do it, but at this point his hand was burning from the combined efforts of the day. He looked at what he made in satisfaction. At least it now looked something like a sphere and he could work from there. Naruto had his eyes screwed shut in concentration, focusing on the movement of chakra in his palm. A week had gone by since Tsunade issued the challenge and he was proud to say he was making progress. After his initial breakthrough he had quickly found that the more rotations he added to the sphere, the more difficult it became to control. The extra burns on his hands were testament to that. The ball of energy was constantly yearning to expand, to grow and eventually dissipate. It had gotten to the point where Naruto had simply allowed it. The ball doubled in size but became nearly half as difficult to manage. He smiled. He now had a perfect sphere of rotating energy contained within his hands. He frowned, remembering that the fourth Hokage had spent nearly 3 years perfecting this technique, so it couldn't possibly be this easy. The moment of truth came when he firmly planted the sphere of energy into a nearby tree, only for it to pathetically strip a few layers of bark before petering out. He stared at his hand in dismay, wondering what it was he did wrong. He had the ball of chakra and it was spinning in multiple directions all at the same speed. He thought that maybe he just needed more power behind it and set about infusing his Rasengan with more chakra to see what would happen. The trees around him were wrecked, many emblazoned with a swirling burn pattern like some kind of brand. He grunted in frustration before summoning yet another ball, pouring in as much chakra as he thought was safe without letting it expand any more. He was sweating from the exertion it put him under, not just today but from going at this non-stop for nearly 5 days. He only had little over a week until the deadline and he had to make those days count. He couldn't let down his friends or the client, more importantly he couldn't let down Tsunade. He had seen it in her eyes, she had lost something very precious that was slowly eating away at her. She hid the pain with gambling and drinking but there was no hiding the fact that she had simply given up hope. She didn't expect him to do this, she didn't expect him to succeed so he needed to prove her wrong. He needed to show her that things were possible and you couldn't just give up on the world. He growled in frustration and gripped his wrist, now pouring in chakra from both arms making the ball pulse excitedly. He didn't care anymore, he wasn't going to limit it, he simply poured in as much chakra as he could, controlling it as best he could from the outside. Finally with a satisfactory cry he held out a very condensed, spinning ball of chakra, double the size of his palm. With a roar he slammed it into a tree, only for his concentration to slip at the last moment. The explosion could be heard throughout the entire town. The explosion had taken him out for a few days. There were only 3 left until the deadline but it was the best thing to have happened so far. Firstly he had seen that he could in fact do it, it was possible and that was all the motivation he needed. Secondly, he had time to think about what else needed to be done and had finally come up with an answer. He wasn't completely sure it would work but that was what he was out here to find out. He formed the Rasengan as quickly as possible, clutching his wrist to steady and increase the chakra supply. Next he condensed it, molding it down while pumping in more chakra before it glowed and pulsed happily. Finally, before he lost control again he attempted to form a thin membrane of chakra around the sphere to contain its energies. He laughed triumphantly as he felt his control over the sphere increase dramatically. He couldn't help it, he just laughed. People passing would have thought him insane for laughing maniacally while holding a bright ball of energy. All his hard work and perseverance finally paid off as he held up the sphere, proudly looking at it. He had to hold his wrist to do it but at least he managed it. He could work on improving it later, right now he had a bet to win. With that he drove the ball into a tree, cleanly shearing the trunk straight through before he cheerfully sprinted back to town. Tsunade stared at the sinning ball with a look caught between disbelief, annoyance, confusion and a small amount of pride. Naruto for his part just looked extremely pleased, not smug, but pleased nevertheless. Shizune was equally shocked. While neither of them had actually expected the boy to accomplish the feat, she was now more worried about the consequences. They would have to pull out another loan to pay off the Tsunade debt. After all, Tsunade may have run out on debts before but she always kept her sides of deals. On that same line of thought the old woman smiled softly as Naruto dissipated the ball of energy, reaching around her neck to unclasp the necklace that hung there. Naruto watched her strangely, only now remembering that part of the deal. He wondered what the significance of the necklace was. It looked old, and valuable, however when Tsunade handed it over he felt calmed by its presence. He also thought it looked pretty cool as he threw it on, letting the cold crystal fall on his chest. That was my grandfather's, the Shodime Hokage. Naruto looked up at Tsunade who was smiling sadly at the aquamarine crystal. Immediately Naruto felt regretful for separating this woman from something that obviously held great sentimental and monetary value. However, when he made a move to remove it and give it back, Tsunade stopped him, making sure his hand was firmly clasped around the amulet. No, Naruto, you earned this. Her smile lost its sad edge and she leaned closer, catching Naruto by surprise, and she moved his headband to one side and gently kissed his forehead. I didn't think you would be able to do it. Her smile had grown at Naruto's flushed face as she leaned back. Thank you for proving me wrong. They talked a little bit longer but ultimately their mission had been fulfilled and Tsunade went about making the necessary preparations to pay the money she had lost. She sighed inwardly, happy for Naruto's success but at the same time greatly irritated by it. No doubt she was going to have to change her appearance yet again to escape bankruptcy, to think she had just gotten used to her 30-year-old form. She sighed, thinking that maybe her teens might be fun again. She idly rubbed the spot her necklace had once rested. A frown appeared as she thought back to its previous 2 owners but dispelled those thoughts when she looked across at Naruto, happily chatting with his friends and Shizune. You learned the Rasengan in 3 weeks. Naruto nodded happily, frowning afterwards at the implication in Jiraiya's tone of voice. So, Jiraiya mumbled something under his breath about annoying blondes. He looked down at his palm and remembered the 4 months that it took him. Then again he didn't have to grab his wrist to make a perfect Rasengan. however it didn't escape his notice that Naruto's was larger, closer to the size of Minato's. Sadly he pulled out the small assortment of balloons from his pocket, throwing them uselessly into the trash. He spent that entire time coming up with a way to learn the technique easily, and Naruto had gone and done it anyway. Even through his disappointment though, Jiraiya couldn't help but smile. The boy really was Minato's son. He laughed softly to himself. Next the boy was going to tell him he had mastered the Hiraishin, building the special kunai from scratch. He laughed again at the absurdity before suddenly looking at the blonde with an intent-filled gaze. Naruto sweated under the observation before Jiraiya finally let up, shaking his head and mumbling, "Nah. It couldn't be," under his breath. The older man seemed to notice that everybody was staring at him like he was insane, and he coughed loudly. "I'm alright then, if there's nothing else then I guess we all better hit the hay." A devious smirk lit up his face. "I only got 2 rooms so I guess me and Anko will bunk up." He said it with a lewd grin that immediately told them he was lost to his little pervert fantasy world. "Yeah, as if, you pervert. I'd rather bunk with the Gakis than you." Jiraiya's face fell before he walked off, mumbling ever more incoherent things. Everybody retired to the rooms that Jiraiya had bought and dumped their equipment down on the floor. That left everybody in the awkward position of staring at the 2 beds before Gaara wordlessly walked over and sat on one, crossing his arms and daring anybody to disagree with him with his eyes. The other 3 stared at the last bed before they all ran at it, shoving and pushing as they dived onto the mattress, still somewhat wrestling for control of the bed. Needless to say, Naruto had a very awkward night as he laid in bed, Tayuya to one side and Anko to the other. He didn't know what Anko was dreaming about, but he imagined it had something to do with teddy bears considering the way she was clutching him to her. He didn't dare move or wake her though. There was a kunai right beneath her pillow and he didn't quite fancy testing out her reflexes. Naruto didn't get much sleep that night. Naruto couldn't remember ever feeling this comfortable before as he woke up. The pillow just felt amazing, just firm enough to support his head yet at the same time soft enough to feel like he was lying against a cloud. He snuggled into it some more, not paying attention to the murmurs coming from above him that came with the motion. He sighed deeply, noticing a scent that hadn't been there before, sweet like a dumpling or dango. Naruto's eyes shot open wide and stared at the ceiling of the hotel room, not daring to move more than an inch at a time as he slowly moved his head. He turned so slowly he would have held up a snail to see what he was resting on, Anko's breasts. He froze in an instant, not knowing what to do. Moving meant Anko might wake up, not moving meant Anko might wake up. He was trapped between a rock and a hard place, figuratively. He decided to just go for it. Staying here was too risky and there was always that kunai to think about. Before he could do anything though, he felt Anko's breath hitch slightly beneath him and once again he froze. "Morning Gaki." Naruto tried not to cringe at the sweet but deadly tone Anko spoke in, instead feigning sleep so he could plead ignorance later. "Oh, don't try that with me Gaki, I know you're awake." Naruto kept at it, really hoping she was bluffing at this point. He could feel her breath so close to his ear now. "Did you enjoy your sleep?" She was whispering and he could practically feel her lips, they were so close to his ear. He went all in at this point, not able to bear the pressure anymore. He turned on Anko's chest, readjusting for more comfort. He hoped that it would seem so brash that Anko would have to believe he was still asleep. He had to stifle the sigh of relief as he heard the woman mumble some curses under her breath about him ruining her fun. She shifted out from beneath him, dropping his head unceremoniously to the mattress, and for a moment he missed the warmth and comfort of her chest. He reconsidered though, it just wasn't worth the loss of a certain anatomical part of his body. He stayed still for another 5 minutes before getting up himself. Anko was in the small kitchenette eating breakfast and he joined her, smiling happily like nothing was wrong. They sat in silence while they ate, both feeling awkward but neither of them showing it, one out of embarrassment and the other out of fear. Thankfully Tayuya woke up not too long after, or more correctly she was forced to by the annoying rays of light filtering in through the blinds. "The fuck's up with you two? You guys look like you've seen a freaking ghost." She laughed to herself before walking off to the bathroom for a shower, a decision Naruto now regretted putting off. Anko looked at him closely, not noticing how nervous he had looked because of her own embarrassment. She saw it now though and her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You were awake." Naruto's eyes shot up and he fell backwards off his chair, crawling away as Anko walked closer to him, twirling a kunai. "No. What? I didn't, there was no, I couldn't have, sorry. And with that Naruto bolted to his feet and did the first thing he could think of, jumping straight out of the window. Anko looked at the broken glass for a moment before smiling devilishly. Sorry Naruto, but you touched the twins, now you have to pay the price. And without further thought Anko raced after Naruto, diving out of the now twice broken window to give chase. An hour later, after Jiraiya prevented Anko from seriously harming the young blonde, the group was out scouring the local gambling halls in search of the elusive Tsunade. They hit the largest and most obvious ones first. It didn't make sense for Tsunade to go there due to her history, but they had to cross them off the list. As they continued to search without luck, they began to feel more and more dejected. Jiraiya began to think they had wasted their time, knowing he shouldn't have listened to the blonde. Finally though they struck luck. It was more by chance that Naruto saw the flash of blonde hair in the crowd and quickly decided to follow it. He pressed through the crowd into a smaller hall where he noticed their surprisingly large buy-in. If Tsunade's moniker held true, then it would be the perfect place to find her, and with that Naruto went about searching for the legendary sucker. He passed through the different rooms where mostly men sat around playing poker or Chohan. The abundance of men made it all the easier to spot Tsunade's recognizable blonde hair out of the throngs of people. He noticed that he was on his own, the others having split up long ago to find the woman he was staring across the room at. He smirked at the opportunity and sat down at the table Tsunade was just about to join, absently noticing that he couldn't spot Shizune anywhere. It struck him as odd. If their last encounter was anything to go on, then the girl was inseparable from the older blonde. Then again, looking across at her now, that statement didn't seem to hold much weight. While it was definitely Tsunade, he could tell that much, she was much younger than he remembered. If he didn't know she was in fact 50-something years old, he might have said 19 or 20. The jutsu she used amazed him, wondering if there was some way he could get her to teach him. He was sure it wouldn't just work for her. Looking as youthful as he wanted sounded perfect to him. It would certainly scare his enemies to come across a man they thought was elderly but looked in the prime of youth. He smiled at the thoughts before sitting down at the table and getting dealt in. Tsunade hadn't noticed him so far, and he used that to his advantage. The game went slowly, with the chips going back and forth between players as slowly one after the other struck out. Naruto was marveling at the lucky streak the old woman seemed to be having, wondering if her nickname was just a ploy to get others to underestimate her. Slowly though the cards turned in his favor and the chips around his person grew into small stacks. He smirked as he sensed his two remaining opponents grow frustrated at his constant winnings. After the next hand the two became one, and soon it was just himself and Tsunade. She still hadn't recognized him. It came down to one last hand. The cards on the table were Queen of Hearts, Jack of Spades, Jack of Clubs, Ten of Diamonds and Queen of Spades. Tsunade grinned maniacally and pushed all her chips into the pot, looking very confident as she went all in. Much more sedately Naruto shrugged and also pushed his chips in. It unnerved his opponent to see him so calm despite the large amount of money he was risking. Honestly, Naruto couldn't have cared less about the money. He made a pretty decent living from his missions. Even so, he enjoyed the moment as Tsunade put down her cards, revealing her hand. Four of a kind, jacks. Naruto just sighed before idly flipping over his own cards with a flick, much to Tsunade's dismay. Four of a kind, queens. Tsunade slumped down onto the table in defeat as the man raked her chips over to Naruto's side of the table. He chuckled at the display before taking enough chips to cover his buy-in and pushing the rest over to Tsunade's still slumped over form. The woman looked up, surprised as she felt the small mountain of chips brush her arm, and stared at the young blonde, squinting at him curiously. Naruto. He smiled at her, finally recognizing him and walking over, but not before she raked all of the chips into a small bag. Naruto, is that you? He nodded with a smirk before Tsunade wiped it off his face by slapping him on the back of his head. You little brat, I would have won if it wasn't for you. He glared angrily back at her, rubbing the sore spot he now had on the back of his head. Hey, at least you got the money. Tsunade stopped her frown and patted the small pouch, smiling at the reassuring clink of chops inside. It was like she didn't really believe they were there and this was all a dream. Now I can buy into an even bigger game and double this, she said it dreamily off into the distance, not really talking to anybody as Naruto felt the sweat on his forehead grow. Shouldn't you pay back your debts first? Tsunade rounded on him, looking like she was going to slap him again. What are you, Shizune, now? Speaking of her apprentice turned assistant, the woman came rushing onto the gambling hall, pushing past the patrons while carrying a pig that Naruto didn't remember seeing the last time. Lady Tsunade. There you are, me and Tonton were looking everywhere for you. Naruto looked quizzically at the small, apparently female pig in the young woman's arms. Tonton stared straight back with a surprising amount of understanding in her eyes considering she was a pig. Not now, Shizune, can't you see I'm talking to an old friend? The woman seemed to notice the small blonde at that point, her eyes widening and her lips curling into a smile. Naruto, it's good to see you. She chuckled to herself, recollecting their last encounter. Learn any new legendary techniques? Naruto smiled and raised a hand to the back of his head, rubbing the spot. Well, actually, now that you mention it, Tsunade. Jiraiya took that moment to walk into the gambling hall, immediately spotting his old teammate. He looked over her appearance with a critical eye born from years of perversion, taking in her single ponytail and two large bangs framing her youthful face. She also wore what she was fond of at the time, her nostalgia overcoming her. It was a short red skirt with a white shirt atop a fishnet vest. Jiraiya seemed to come to a decision and raised a thumb in her direction, a gleaming smile along with it. I like the new, or should I say, old, look. Tsunade quickly repeated the same maneuver she had on Naruto, but with considerably more force. It was enough to send Jiraiya halfway through the wall of the building, earning a satisfied smile from the youthful-looking woman. When he finally picked himself out of the wall with some help from Naruto and Shizune, he wobbled back over. Good to see you as always, Tsunade. What do you want, Jiraiya? He straightened up instantly, like he was never injured in the first place. Always straight to the point. Come on, I'll buy you a drink while I explain it. Once everybody was settled into the booth in a small out-of-the-way tavern, Jiraiya cleared his throat. Okay, Tsunade, I'm going to be blunt with you. The council asked me to find you and offer you the position of Hokage. The woman and her apprentice looked slack-jawed at the man, Tsunade instantly downing her saucer of sake. Naruto looked on in amusement, wondering how the woman would take such a proposition. For that matter, Naruto wondered how he would take such news as he downed his own saucer. It had become clear a while ago that the blonde couldn't get drunk, no matter how hard he tried. It was similar to his resistance to most poisons in that the Kyuubi would immediately remove the toxins from his system. He pondered the question himself, wondering what being Kazekage would be like. There was the respect and power to think about, while on the other side there would be the responsibility and enemies he might gain. There would also be a great deal of difficult decisions he might be forced to make. In the end, Naruto decided that he couldn't come to a decision either way, thinking it was unlikely he would have to think about such things for a long time. You can't be serious, Jiraiya. Naruto broke out of his inner monologue, noticing that the sake jug was considerably emptier now. Completely, Tsunade, the old woman stared at her former teammate for a few seconds, scrutinizing his face. Why me? Jiraiya looked confused for a moment, obviously not having thought the question would come up. What are you talking about, Tsunade? You are the granddaughter of the first Hokage, grandniece of the second and student of the third. There isn't anybody better suited. Again, Tsunade scrutinized the man. You of all people should know that connections and names mean nothing compared to true merits, Jiraiya. You yourself are more powerful than me, why weren't you considered? Naruto stared at the elderly sage for a moment, wondering how he could possibly be more powerful than Tsunade. He had seen her strength firsthand. I was. That simple statement shocked everybody at the table. But I turned him down. Jiraiya seemed to have gone quite serious by this point, more so than many of the people there had ever seen him. You were always the more level-headed of us, Tsunade, always making the difficult decisions and keeping me and Orochimaru from fighting. The woman flinched at the name of their other teammate and Naruto immediately sensed there was something she was hiding. Please, Jiraiya, the Hokage's position is a fool's job. Everybody that takes it just dies. Normally Naruto would have been able to keep out of this conversation, keeping his emotions and opinions to himself. However, Tsunade had just indirectly insulted the old man, the first man to befriend him and earn Naruto's respect, even if he didn't show it as much as he should have. We all die at some point, Tsunade. The table became eerily quiet as everybody turned to look at the young blonde. Every shinobi has to accept that at some point. His tone was flat and even, not a hint of emotion or sarcasm present. At least the Hokage died for something they believed in, sacrificing themselves for something bigger than themselves. I think the old man called it the Wall of Fire once. The two Sanin felt the wave of melancholy wash over them as they remembered their sensei's favorite phrase. You don't know what you're talking about, brat. You've never seen true pain, or the sting of the loss of a loved one. Tsunade's eyes were once again misted with melancholy as the faces of her deceased brother and former lover flashed through her mind. Maybe not, but at least I accept that I will face pain in my life. Whether I overcome it or not is yet to be said, but I will never stop fighting to protect the ones I care about and do everything in my power to make sure the same can't be said for them. The faintest hints of a smile tweaked at the edges of Tsunade's lips as an image of Nawaki seemed to superimpose itself on Naruto's features. Bravely said, brat, but you still have no idea what you're talking about. Naruto shrugged absently. He had said what he meant to say. How the woman took it was not his concern. All this time both Tayuya and Gaara had been staring at Naruto, wondering at the conviction behind his words. Tayuya especially seemed moved, and she swore Naruto had been looking straight at her when he had said, "The ones I care about." You know, Tsunade, you may be right. Everybody turned to Jiraiya in shock, his companions wondering what the hell he was doing. Maybe you aren't right for the Hokage position. He seemed to look in thought before looking off into the distance. Maybe I was too hasty in turning down the job myself. A lustful and recognizable grin spread across his features after he said it, and most of the people at the table groaned inwardly. Yes, I can see it now. Hot springs around every corner, mixed baths all throughout the village. As Hokage I would have command over all the lovely kunoichi. His eyes glazed over for a moment and Naruto thought he saw hints of drool at the corners of his mouth. He stood up, adopting his classic hero pose, and looked off into the foreground. Yes, I, Jiraiya, the legendary Toad Sage of Mount Myoboku, will take the position of Hokage and lead the women of Konoha into a new golden age. He was promptly cut off from his rant by a slender fist impacting painfully with his abdomen, quickly sending the elderly man skidding across the bar. He only stopped when his face met the concrete wall, sending spider web cracks out from the impact zone. Tsunade snarled in annoyance, blowing on her fist as she sat back down with her arms crossed under her chest. Like I would ever let a pervert like you become Hokage. The three younger shinobi looked at the woman skeptically while Anko was just grinning crazily, wondering if she could get that strong. So are you going to accept the position? It was Gaara who spoke, his monotone voice cutting through the silence that had settled. Tsunade just slumped a little in her seat, sighing deeply, realizing what her little display of anger might have cost her. I don't know. She seemed to slump even more as she said it, the full impact of the words hitting her. For a fleeting moment she had actually considered it, and deep within her that didn't bode well. We'll give you some time to decide. Jiraiya had suddenly popped out of nowhere, startling everybody and nearly earning him another fist to the gut compliments of his former teammate. Damn it, Jiraiya, you know I hate when you do that. He just nodded absently while waving his hand in a dismissive manner. He motioned for everybody to leave the woman and her apprentice with some time to think things over. However, before he left he turned to Tsunade, deciding to impart the words he thought would have the most impact of the conversation. You do know, Tsunade, that if you turn down their offer, it will naturally be Danzo they turn to next. Without any more needing to be said, Jiraiya hastily walked out of the bar, following his odd band of companions as they went back to their hotel. Tsunade was left with a sinking feeling as she was now left with two very important decisions to make, and not much time to do it in. Jiraiya, are you sure it was a good idea to give Tsunade time to think about this? It was strange seeing Gaara uncertain about something, but he was only voicing what was on everybody's minds. The older man shrugged lightly, still looking as thoughtful as he had while walking out of the bar. I've known that woman for nearly 40 years of my life and I still can't predict what she'll do worth a damn. Anko just chuckled at that, but Jiraiya stayed oddly serious. I don't trust her right now, there was something she was hiding from me. Naruto nodded from his position on the bed. Yeah, I thought that too, it was when you mentioned Orochimaru. Again Jiraiya went into deep thought, dismissing everybody from his room. He had a sinking feeling about this whole situation and he was going to have to talk to Tsunade sooner or later. Anko, Naruto and Tayuya were walking through the packed streets of Tanzaku town, all of them slightly awed by what they saw. Gaara had elected to stay back at the hotel. Lots of people just meant it as more likely someone would bump into him, and generally those encounters did not go well. Currently Naruto was gawking at a large stand where the objective was to knock a small pyramid of bottles down with just 3 balls. It seemed simple enough. He had practiced throwing kunai and shuriken for the majority of his life. Hey, what are you doing? Naruto, hand about to reach for a ball, looked up at the stall owner in confusion as he pointed to the sign hanging over the entrance. No shinobi, you guys rip me off every time. Naruto sighed while looking around, noticing many of the other stalls had similar policies hung up to ward off headband wearers. Am I allowed to have a go, mister? Naruto's eyes widened when he heard the strangely familiar voice but in a much sweeter tone. He looked around and saw Tayuya, minus her forehead protector rocking slightly on her back foot, actually managing to pull off a shy look. He gawked for a moment before the stall owner broke him out of the shock. Of course, little miss, just try to be careful with these balls, okay? You don't want to hurt anybody. Tayuya seemed taken aback by this, putting her hand over her mouth as she mock gasped. No, of course not, mister. The old man just smiled at the sweet young girl while Naruto continued to stare in amazement at both the act and the fact it was Tayuya doing it. She picked up a ball and looked at it, perfectly adopting the pose of a civilian who had never handled deadly hand projectiles before. Hey mister, what do I get if I knock down all the bottles? The old man smiled again, knowing that it would be almost impossible to do so thanks to the weighted bottles in the middle. Well, little miss, you can choose anything you like from the top shelf. Tayuya seemed ecstatic about this, gleefully hopping up and down before playfully sticking her tongue out of her mouth in fake concentration. She aimed down her arm carefully before launching the small ball with all her shinobi training and skill, catching the center of the pyramid and sending all 6 of the bottles hurtling towards the back of the stall. She didn't stop there though, the ball actually managed to ricochet off of the first pyramid, striking the one next to it and causing a similar collapse. Wow, that was so cool. Do I get 2 prizes now? The question sounded so innocent even Naruto was a little convinced, wondering if Tayuya actually had a twin sister with incredible aim. The stall owner looked dumbfounded, staring at the scattered bottles on the ground and nodding dumbly. Yeah, sure, I guess. Tayuya did another little gleeful hop before looking down at the counter. Oh hey, I still have 2 balls left. Everybody near the counter heard the owner let out an anguished groan. Tayuya looked particularly pleased with herself as she walked down the street carrying 2 of her prizes for the day, Naruto of course being forced to carry the other 2. She was a little disappointed that she hadn't managed to get another 2 in one shot but was still happy with the look on the stall owner's face. Naruto for his part was just wondering whether he would be able to pull off a stunt like that. He thought probably not. It got him thinking though, women were able to get a lot of stuff for free or at least lower their opponent's guards, either by acting cute or sexy. Perhaps he could develop a form of henge to that effect. The cogs in his head began to turn when suddenly a purple blur ran up to them. Naruto thought the young girl was oddly familiar. She was about their age with purple hair drawn into a pineapple-esque bun not dissimilar from Anko's, and she wore a plain black t-shirt with a simple burnt orange skirt. Hi, she was looking straight at Naruto, completely ignoring Tayuya's presence. Hi. The girl smiled broadly at that, making Naruto a little nervous at how familiar this all seemed. The girl seemed to notice his discomfort and stuck out a hand. I'm Kiyomi. Naruto rubbed the back of his head but offered his other hand all the same. Naruto Uzumaki. The girl started to move like Tayuya did before, with her arms behind her back and looking down at the ground while swiveling on one foot. I noticed you have a ton of prizes, which must mean you're really strong. There was the smallest blush on the girl's face when she said this, and Tayuya started to see what was happening. Actually, I'm the one who won the animals. The girl just nodded politely to the redhead before turning back around to Naruto with the same gushing smile. Wow, then it's so cool of you to help her carry them. Naruto was starting to feel a little uncomfortable with all the attention he was getting. Suddenly he developed his own blush as the girl sidled over and wrapped her arm around his. Wow, and you are really strong too. By now Naruto was speechless. He had never received treatment like this before and his mind was struggling with what to do. By now Tayuya was fuming at what the girl was doing to Naruto. Get the fuck off of him, you whore. The girl just turned around in a small amount of frustration and glared daggers at the redhead, unlinking her arm from Naruto's all the same. Fine. She turned back to Naruto with a sultrier grin. Why don't you come find me when your girlfriend isn't around? With that the girl took off with a way in her step, quickly being lost to the impenetrable crowd, leaving behind a stupefied Naruto and a furious Tayuya. That was weird. Why would that girl think you were my girlfriend? Naruto's head quickly met with the ass of one of Tayuya's prizes as she launched it at him with her full strength. Of course it was only a stuffed toy, so Naruto wasn't even fazed, but he still looked at Tayuya curiously, recognizing all the signs that she was very angry. What? You think I wouldn't make a good girlfriend? With that, Tayuya launched her other stuffed animal and stormed off. Naruto just stared after her, thoroughly confused at everything at the moment. What the hell just happened? Kirimi slunk into a nearby alleyway, smirking all the way as smoke enveloped her form. Out of it stepped a grinning and amused Anko. It didn't even faze her that the two Chunin hadn't seen through her henge. She was a master of infiltration for a reason. Her thoughts were more on what she had gathered with that quick reconnaissance mission. She had her suspicions before, but seeing Tayuya's burst of blatant jealousy at least confirmed it. The fact that Naruto was completely clueless to the girl's feeling was a definite worry. Relationships in themselves weren't all that dangerous to shinobi. They might hurt you once in a while and be used against you, but in the end it was the ninja who had to decide if it was worth it. No, it was unresolved relationships that were the danger out on missions where even a moment of hesitancy or uncertainty would get not only you, but also a teammate killed. As the current sensei, it now fell to Anko to sort out the mess the two Chunin had made with their life. It wasn't really her problem whether or not it worked out for them. What was important was that they understood what was going on, for better or worse. Anko sighed. She wasn't naturally the meddling type despite what people might think, and she wasn't exactly the guru on relationships, but she certainly knew one thing that would bring Tayuya's feelings to the surface. The young Tokubutsu Junin slunk back into the shadows, an idea already forming in her mind. A few days later, Naruto was peacefully dozing on the couch, having realized it was the much safer option. It wasn't all that comfortable, but he had certainly weathered worse in his brief time. He was in that strange state between waking and sleeping where you decide whether or not it's actually worth getting up yet. Anko was already up. He could hear movement in the kitchen, and at this hour it was highly unlikely to be Tayuya. Finally, the discomfort of the couch outweighed the possible comfort of sleep, and he lazily swung himself up before sleepily dragging himself to the kitchen. He plopped down on a stool and went about making some quick food from one of the cartons and tubs in the cupboards. Gaara joined them not long after, so all three were surprised and unprepared when the door suddenly burst open, despite the lock being closed, and a panting and exhausted Shizune broke through. Everybody swiveled on their seats, ready for trouble. Sand was already trickling out of Gaara's gourd, and Anko had a hand on a few kunai. They took in Shizune's form, noticing the few scratches on her clothes, or at least Naruto did. Shizune. He rushed over, catching the woman who looked about ready to fall over. What's wrong? What happened to you? She took a few deep breaths before turning to everybody in the room. Orochimaru, you have to help Lady Tsunade. Naruto nodded with determination as Anko joined him at Shizune's side, a grim but equally determined look on her features. Where is she? Shizune coughed a few times, worrying Naruto further. The castle, hurry. She didn't need to say it twice as Naruto was already out the door. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.